Good evening, and welcome to our last panel discussion of the day on conference takeaways and next steps for foresight in Europe. After 2 days of rather intense and diverse discussions on the future, we're now going to see what conclusions we can draw from the conference and also look at, well, the future of looking into the future. My name is Simonetta Cook. I'm a member of the Cabinet of Charles Michel, and I head the ESPAS's Young Talent Network. I'm delighted to introduce 4 very senior representatives of some of the E institutions on this panel today. We have Klaus Welle, Secretary General of the European Parliament, Stephen Quest, our newly appointed chair of ESPAS and Director General of the Commission's Joint Research Centre, Didier Seeuws, Director General of the Council's General and Institutional Policy DG, largely responsible for preparing European Council meetings, and last but not least, Helena König, Deputy Secretary General of the External Action Service. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here this evening. I'd like to start by reflecting a little on the conference. So we've seen how the EU can build resilience, can build back better in these rather challenging times. We've looked at various policy areas, how the EU can fully harness the green transition, the digital revolution. We've looked at how the EU can engage with other partners, with its transatlantic partners, but also the rest of the world. So ultimately, we've been looking at how the EU can really best navigate the world of tomorrow. And we're gradually gaining a sharper picture of what the future may look like for the EU and how the EU can best prepare for it. But the EU is often seen as a reactive organization. It's arguably decisions are made by politicians who may find that short-term wins are perhaps more appealing than long-term commitments. So perhaps my first question goes to Klaus, Didier, and maybe Helena. How can we ensure that politicians within the EU and the EU institutions are open to thinking about the future? And how can we make our foresight work be generally more impactful? Klaus, would you like to?
Simonetta, I think you're right that a lot of politics is about reacting to events because events are so powerful that you have to find a proper answer. But I believe that's exactly the function the European Union can contribute, that we have the capacity here also in the EU institutions, but also nationally, to provide a broader picture, to give more analytical skills. And maybe what we had to do a little bit better, and that's where I think ESPAS is kicking in, to have the debate also among the institutions, even among leading staff of the institutions. And I think what we are now increasingly finding out is that after a good decade where this has been established and brought to a certain level of maturity, we also see that we have to reach out, not only across the transatlantic, but increasingly also towards Asia. If we are not listening to Asia, we will not have the complete picture. And I'm very happy that during this conference, we gave more Asian voices also the possibility to express themselves.
Well, I couldn't agree more with Klaus. Politics or the political dynamics are largely driven by events. That goes for national politics, but it goes also for European politics. The way in the European Council we try to pull away a bit from the events is by inserting more strategic debates so that we take a kind of helicopter view from events that are happening. If you see the agenda of the last months, it's about energy prices. There are short-term events. It's about the problems at our borders. It's about migration. It's about hybrid threats. But by organizing these strategic debates, we pull it away from the event thing and frame it in the long-term trends. For example, AUKUS, Afghanistan were events, but there is the long-term trend, the long-term geopolitical shift. And via these political debates, which are better and better prepared, and I think through the dialogue that we have among institutions and the work that we have between the capacity in the different institutions, ART, our research entity in the Council, but also with the Commission and the Parliament, the External Action Service, I think we can better prepare our leaders for these strategic debates.
Helena?
Yeah, I think it's, I agree totally on what has been said. I think it's also extremely important that you have the foresight element when you prepare proposals on EU level, because of course it goes for decision later. But I think already during the quite long time sometimes when we work out political proposals, it is important to really have this foresight so we know where we will be when we're actually putting it to decision. And for me, foresight is very much about having a dialogue, and it can only be better if we actually prepare this dialogue and we exchange more often. And as was said, preparing our politicians also to have this dialogue on the highest level.
Stephen? Perhaps my next question is more towards Stephen, addressed towards Stephen. It's on ESPAS and building on the progress ESPAS has made over the last couple of years. I'm thinking about our various global trend reports, the horizon scanning network that we're thinking about, reviving the young talent network, if I can mention that. What do you see as some of the initiatives you'd like to see ESPAS engage in perhaps, let's say, in the coming year?
Well, thanks a lot. I mean, I think you've listed already a good array of what ESPAS is doing. And I think the first objective is we need to keep on doing that, because we've seen, I think, a very significant step forward in the recent past. And we see, I think through this conference, I mean, 3 takeaways I bring from this are, we see a very high level of ambition and a high level of momentum now behind the foresight work and really putting foresight at the center of the policy reflection. Whether it's the work going on at a national level, the ministers of the future, as Vice President Šefčovič refers to them, or the work and the cooperation between the institutions, including in this network. And I think that momentum and that level of ambition is there and present. We need to really build on that. I think we've seen an ability now to embed foresight work in the policy process, and there's been great examples through this conference of how that embedding is happening, both through using foresight techniques and the different discussions we've had about that, but also the way in which it's driving the policy process. And I think we've also seen the relevance of foresight for the huge challenges we're facing, whether it's the green digital transition, whether it's geopolitics. We've had a great discussion this afternoon on the geopolitical dimension. So I think these all show the strengths of the foresight work and the contribution that ESPAS can bring. So I think we need to keep on doing that. We need to strengthen our work on horizon scanning. I think the Young Talent Network is an absolutely key dimension to our work, because we need to hear the voice of the younger generations, and we need to have a more diverse approach within ESPAS. And I think we need to be better at outreach. We've done a lot of work, I think, internally in the community, talking to ourselves. I think that's important. But it's not the only thing we should be doing, so we need to also build that dimension in the next phase of our work.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll just build on what you've just mentioned. You're talking about the need to build outreach. The last thing we want to do is to be talking simply amongst ourselves. And arguably, ESPAS has really developed a very impressive network of foresight practitioners from all over the world and from all disciplines. We're also seeing that governments and the private sector are also boosting their foresight capacity. And should, therefore, the EU and ESPAS work concretely with others, perhaps outside Europe, on foresight? Could we do that? And what can we gain from that?
Well, I certainly think we should interact with others. I think, we have, on the one hand, we need to maintain a safe space to think amongst ourselves. I personally think that's absolutely vital. But we shouldn't only do that. We need to be able to have interactions with others, and I think these 2 days have shown the power of those interactions. So this is one example of how we can do this, how we can open up conversations, and how we can interact. And I think we need to keep a very open mind about the best ways to do that. I would be in favor of having a rather flexible approach to doing that, to give us the agility to, I mean, we don't want to be driven by events, but we need to be able to respond to events as well as to try and shape future trends. And we need to keep that flexibility and that open mind as we move forward.
Does anyone else want to add anything on reaching out? Helena?
Just a few points, and I agree of the importance that we have a dialogue among ourselves. It's the base also for how we can act and react. At the same time, almost all issues are global nowadays, and almost everything influences us. So I think it's a must actually to have this dialogue with others also, because there are areas or regions, events happening where someone else will know a lot more than we do. And I think that's the interesting part when it comes to interacting with other countries, regions, different formats actually also. And I think that is something, it's a big challenge, but it's also one of the most interesting parts as we go forward.
Thank you, Helena. So, beyond the EU building a strong foresight capacity, beyond it persuading decision makers to make more informed choices based on a vision of tomorrow, beyond the EU reaching out to other organizations and to the rest of the world, what else can the EU do to be better prepared for shocks and disruptions? So, for instance, many could argue that the pandemic was actually to be anticipated. Is there something, do you have any views you'd like to share on how the EU really could, beyond what we've mentioned already, be better prepared for some of these shocks and disruptions? Klaus.
Maybe I could say the following, because Stephen also mentioned the private sector. Of course, private sector has private sector interests, that's clear. But at least there's one industry, I think, which has a lot of knowledge we could maybe profit from, and that's the reinsurance industry. Because they pay if something is going terribly wrong. If climate change, nuclear power plants, flooding, major economic catastrophes, they have to pay. So there, I think, objectively, we have very similar interests, and they employ thousands of people with very sophisticated, detailed knowledge, and why not make use of this? And at the same time, maybe then political institutions can help that some of these catastrophes finally are not coming about, which is also not a very bad outcome.
Stephen?
Well, your question was very big, and I don't pretend to have a complete answer to it. But one thing that I think we can do from the foresight perspective is provide some tools and a space to try to help confront and overcome the anxiety that we face in policy circles and in political circles about dealing with uncertainty. Because we are often driven by events, and there's often a need to have quick, rapid, and in a sense, simple answers to what are complex problems. What foresight can bring is a space where we can open up and explore possible alternative futures through using things like scenarios, and to create a greater sense of comfort in dealing with the inevitable uncertainties and the inevitable complexity that we are confronting now and we will confront in the future. And the better we are at doing that through the lens of foresight, through looking at alternative scenarios and debating them and confronting ourselves with them, the better equipped I think we are going to be to actually acting and reacting in the moment when we have to, because there's a real crisis and a real event happening in the here and now.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. In fact, yes, that's one of the criticisms that are often voiced about the EU, is that it's incapable sometimes of providing very simple answers to complex issues. And the more we can do that, perhaps the more we can also fight some more populist tendencies that we see that work very much on that principle. Didier, would you like to?
Well, perhaps shortly. One of the questions is, how can we, for example, present inconvenient truths to our leaders, because that should be one of the strengths of ESPAS. To me, the fact that we are an informal network makes the inhibition for that confrontation a lot lesser. So I think we should keep this network very informal. We should indeed draw in with strengths from the private sector, like the insurance example that was given, also links with institutes outside Europe. But nevertheless, we need to keep it informal, because the moment it becomes a fully formalized thing, we will be inhibited by the political imperatives of our different institutions. And that's a line we should not cross.
Helena, would you like to chip in? Otherwise, yeah.
Again, I very much agree with what was said, and I think in particular the last what Didier was saying. It's good to come with the hard truths, but they have to be really well researched and very convincing put forward. So in a sense, I think it's all builds it in together. How do we find the information? And I'm sure there are a number of private sector companies, but also other organizations that are working out in different sectors or fields that can contribute to that. And I think one of the challenges is really how do we identify them and how do we get them to work with us? And that is something I think it is worth trying to put some time on.
Certainly, thank you, Helena. I think there certainly is a compelling argument for trying to pool our knowledge together and try and act as coherently as possible in relation to looking at future trends and conditioning our actions accordingly. I'm quite aware of the time, so perhaps I would just like to ask you if you would like to share some concluding remarks or some major takeaways of this conference. What were the things that you think marked you particularly, or that you would like to take back home and consider precious information from this conference? I'm sure there's plenty, but Stephen?
Well, I can go first. I mean, I could talk for several hours about this, but I'm conscious I've only got 30 seconds. I mean, I gave you my three key takeaways. Was this point about the level of ambition, the embedding of foresight in the policy process, and the relevance of foresight for the policy challenges that we're facing in the future. The other message that I really take from the different conversations is one of optimism. And a lot of people saying, yes, there's a lot of difficulties. It's easy to get ground down with all of this sort of negative language. But here we are talking about foresight, and the future is in our hands. And there was a great quote in one of the panels yesterday where someone said, the best time to start thinking about the future was yesterday, and the second best time is today. And so luckily, this conference has been over 2 days. We did yesterday and we've done today. So I think we're very well placed to solve the problems of the future.
Thank you. Klaus?
I'm still under the impression of the debate I had with General McMaster, former National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. And you see how much US-China or West and China has the potential to restructure not only that relationship, but more or less all the aspect of politics over there, but also here. But we could also see that there's still work to be done to communicate that when Europe is trying to get its act together and to think more strategically, that this is also in the best interest of the alliance.
Thank you. Helena?
I think one of the takeaways I take is really to expand the conversation, to expand it not only internally, but very much externally also. I think there is a very obvious tendency of focusing more internally among our partners. We're already a complicated setup with our member states, but then often I think foresight when it comes to outside events sometimes have a tendency of coming in too late. And I'm really saying too late and not late. And there I think there is still some, like I said, fun and challenging work to do. And I think that's what we really should devote a lot of energy on.
Thanks, Helena. Didier, I notice we have 40 seconds left. I'll be asked to introduce the next panel, so can you condense your thoughts in about 20 seconds?
20 seconds. I think one of the more important events that happened recently was the fact that the Commissioner raised the political awareness of foresight by creating this network of ministers of the future. So I think we should build on that, because if politicians have an awareness of this, it will be better embedded in our policy making as well.
Super. Thank you very
less than
much.
40 seconds.
That was perfect timing. That brings our panel to a close. And I'd like to thank all panelists for being here and mention that the next session and the final session of this conference will follow in just a few minutes, and we'll be welcoming first Vice President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, and she'll be offering some concluding remarks. Thank you very much. Good evening.